It's been a while since we've talked about 40k on this channel, but faction videos are pretty fun, and 40k has a lot of them. I'm not going to claim any creativity on this topic. It was the original Bricky one that got me to go from dipping my toes into the setting to having several armies, but I figured I might have some different insights into each faction, and everybody's going to have their own biases. So here we are. Full disclosure, I'm a bit more of a collector and a lore guy than a game guy, but I still have played a fair amount. I just want to say that because that'll be my focus in telling you about these guys. So here we go. It is the 41st millennium. For more than 100 centuries, the Emperor has sat immobile on the golden throne of Earth. He is the master of mankind by the will of the gods, and master of a million worlds by the might of his inexhaustible armies. He is a rotting carcass writhing invisibly with power from the dark age of technology. He is the carrion lord of the Imperium, for whom 1,000 souls are sacrificed every day so that he may never truly die. Yet even in this deathless state, the Emperor continues his eternal vigilance. Mighty battle fleets cross the demon-infested miasma of the warp, the only route between distant stars. Their way lit by the Astronomicon, the psychic manifestation of the Emperor's will. Vast armies give battle in his name on uncounted worlds. Greatest amongst his soldiers are the Adeptus Astartes, the Space Marines, bioengineered super warriors. Their comrades in arms are legion. The Imperial Guard and countless planetary defense forces, the ever-vigilant Inquisition, and the tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus, only to name a few. But for all their multitudes, they are barely enough to hold off the ever-present threat from aliens, heretics, mutants, and worse. To be a man in such times is to be amongst untold billions. It is to live in the cruelest and most bloody regime imaginable. These are the tales of those times. Forget the power of technology and science, for so much has been forgotten, never to be relearned. Forget the promise of progress and understanding, for in the grim dark future, there is only war. There is no peace amongst the stars, only an eternity of carnage and slaughter, and the laughter of thirsting gods. So yeah, if you somehow haven't heard that before and yet still found this channel and video, I would be quite surprised, but in either case, you now know what we're dealing with. However, a big point I'll make of my own right off the bat is more than anything, 40k is huge, and not only that, but hugely varied in tone. While the general vibe of the setting is basically like what I just read you, it's grim, dark, and a little miserable, very cosmic. There's a little something of almost everything else in there, from straight-up comedies to things more around noble dark. There are even crime novels. And for whatever problems one might have with 40k as a setting, one thing I think holds universally true is that if you have even the vaguest interest in the setting, there is something here that will probably interest you somewhere. And that is best found by picking what faction you want to focus on. Whether it's playing with them, learning their lore, collecting their models, whatever it might be. What I'm about to say is something I also brought up in my other 40k video, and that is that fundamentally, however you plan to interact with the setting, choose the faction that you think is the coolest. It sounds obvious, but that goes especially for those of you primarily interested in the game side of the hobby. Choosing an army that plays well rules-wise, despite you not caring about it in any other way, is a pathway to guaranteed meh, because by the time you've bought and painted an army, the rules will have changed anyway, so don't play things for rules. Just don't. With that out of the way, we're going to start with the faction that the most people, including myself, started with. Space Marines. While in theory this is one army, the reality is that it's many small armies. You've seen these guys in Astartes, Space Marine 2, maybe the Amazon Prime show. If you know what 40k is, you probably know what a Space Marine is. They're genetically engineered super soldiers with all sorts of different twists depending on what you want your roided out child soldiers to be like. In a meta sense, Space Marines are kind of the everyman faction of 40k. And they're good for all types of people, and that's the reason I say that, because by no means are they every man in the setting. Well, some people, including myself to an extent, have some concerns about wishing Space Marines weren't pushed quite as hard as they are in official 40k stuff. You've got to admit they're popular for a good reason. They have everything you could want. A faction for any niche, and the ability to just make up your own group of them if you don't like any of the established sub-factions, which are called chapters, by the way. There is a type of Space Marine for anybody. The main thing you need to know starting with them is that they have a million different types of models, and they're all generally pretty simple to paint. They're also really easy to find cheaper on the secondhand market if budgeting is a concern, which it will be if you're getting into buying models. However, one cannot really talk about Space Marines in general that much because they're so varied. While they're all nigh ageless warriors that serve the Empire and slay the heretic and the Xenos with their bolters, the similarities sort of dilute much further than that. So we're going to start with the ones that have their own dedicated model ranges first, and then move on to the more Codex compliant sort of similar-y chapters. The first big subgroup is the Black Templars. They are basically Knights Hospitaller from real life. They're crusading knights with a gothic space fantasy aesthetic. They do exactly what you'd think when you apply the archetypical crusader trope to this kind of setting. They rely on melee weapons, especially swords, are perpetually on the move towards their enemy, which is to say, on crusade, and are fervently loyal to the Emperor. In fact, unlike most Space Marines who view the Emperor as an admirable figure worthy of their service, but not a defined figure, the Black Templars fully believe in the idea of the God Emperor of mankind. Their zeal is matched only by a faction we'll get to later, and there's a lot to like about these guys. They have good books, including Hell's Reach, and great models as well. Just don't get a tattoo of their chapter symbol. Black Templar fans have a bit of a reputation for getting a little unironic. Next would be the Blood Angels, or Alucard in space. Everything with these guys is blood or sanguine or crimson. They're very pretty for Space Marines, which is rarer than you might expect, and actually tend to, on average, we're not talking about the flesh tearers, be more heroic than the generally gray at best Imperial forces. Their culture is defined by the noble sacrifice of their Primarch, which is to say their demigod father, Sanguinius, who perished fighting the arch-traitor Horus, who put the Emperor into his big coma. For this reason, Blood Angels get a little kooky and have to be put into the Death Company, as they cannot be trusted to restrain themselves otherwise. They're also very vampiric in their themes, so if that's your vibe, go for it. They also recently got some new models, and though opinions of them were slightly mixed, as a whole, the Blood Angels are a great pick. Here's the bias alarm coming up, because next is the faction I started with, and thus it's probably my favorite, the Dark Angels. Where the Black Templars are frothing at the mouth Crusader Knights, the Dark Angels are more Arthurian, monastic, round table, and secretive kind of knights. They rock hoods and robes while wearing power armor, which shouldn't work, but it does, and wield both baller swords and forbidden technology from back before the Imperium of Man even existed. Lore-wise, they're a little bit OP, though many things in 40k are quite OP. Their Primarch, the Lion, recently returned from a 10,000-year hiatus to take the fight to the enemies of the Imperium. However, he's a real breath of fresh air as a character, especially if you read the book Lion, Son of the Forest, where he has not only matured from his portrayal in the massive Horus Heresy series, but also can recognize the bloated monstrosity the Imperium of the 41st millennium is. Because, remember, no matter how true it is that the Imperium is better than Chaos and some of the Xenos, that still doesn't make them good, nor all of its evils necessary evils. The Dark Angels also just have excellent models, a lot of which are new, lots of content. Once again, very biased, but they're a great faction to get into. Next is the Deathwatch. They are the Space Marine Avengers in a sense. They collect skilled members from every Space Marine chapter, though it is considered a punishment to some of them, to put them into highly specialized teams to hunt aliens/Xenos. Honestly, conceptually, pretty sick. However, one thing I always want to do with just anything I say on this channel is be straightforward about it, and so I'll do that with the Deathwatch. They're a little hard to recommend. While their concept is cool, and there's no denying that it's fun to mash together a Dark Angel, a Space Wolf, and an Ultramarine within the same army, there are a lot of unfortunate and not exactly obvious issues with them as a faction at the moment. The first is that they don't have many bespoke models, and the ones they do have are generally kind of old. As far as lore goes, they're saddled with generally being the subject of some questionable writing decisions, in particular anything they've had to do with the Ynnari plotline, And gameplay-wise, they are in a really odd spot that makes them hard to play, at least as I understand it. But if you're really drawn to them, don't let my words stop you, just keep those things in mind as you get into them. Next are the Grey Knights. These are sort of a logical counterpart to the Deathwatch. While the Deathwatch hunts aliens, these guys are your anti-chaos specialists. They are also all magic, or psychic in 40k terms. They're great casters, love beating things with hammers, and have a pretty sick and solid color scheme. They even have the baby carrier. Jokes aside, they are definitely better off than the Deathwatch, but do have some things to watch out for. The first is that they too have some slightly off lore, namely what they did to the Battle Sisters that one time, but overall, not bad. However, with the models, I have a very strong recommendation, which is just to wait a little bit. Their models are they're just little guys and look not all that great next to the modern Space Marine sculpts. So if you want them, wait until they get some new releases so that the scale can be fixed, though it might be a little while yet. And in terms of gameplay, they do teleport shenanigans, but I've heard complaints that they're lacking in some flavor this edition. So Grey Knights are a yes, but maybe give it a bit to see where they're at in like a year or two, assuming you're watching this around the time of release. Next are the Space Wolves. Be prepared to be the subject of many furry jokes. They are your Viking archetype, and they have a lot of things called wolf. They have the personality you might expect. They're loud and brash and brave. They're a lot of fun. And their Primarch, Leman Russ, is a pretty interesting guy you can read about in the Horus Heresy, and my money is on him being the next one to get an actual model for 40k itself, though it might be another guy I'll mention later. In addition, at time of recording, they just got a huge new model release, which had some pretty banger stuff in it. So, they're 10s on the modeling department. Overall, not much more to say. If you think you'll like them, you probably will. Finally, of the more specialized Marines are the least unique Marines, the Ultramarines. Does the word Marine even mean anything anymore? Probably not. In any case, these guys are the poster child of the setting. You see them almost everywhere, most notably in Space Marine 2. They're good, dependable, reliable, can't go wrong with Ultramarines. Their focus is on being like ancient Rome and having good logistics. Doesn't sound all that crazy, but it means they have quite the impact on the lore via the incredible superpower of using their brains correctly. Some hate them for being overrepresented, which is kind of fair, but you know, they're pretty neat still. They also have a lot of unique models, including their own Primarch, Papa Smurf himself, Roboute Guilliman, and much like his chapter itself, he's notable for being someone with more than just kill the Xenos etched into his brain. The rest of the Space Marines really only have 1 or 2 unique models each, so there's less to say, but I will still pay them their dues. And the first of those is the Imperial Fists. They're a little like the Ultramarines, with a greater focus on the idea of being stoic defenders. They love themselves some fortifications, and as you might expect, power fists. Their Primarch, Rogel Dorn, is missing, but may return at some point. Basically, they appeal to the same kind of person the Ultramarines do, but with their own, twists on certain things. If they weren't yellow, I'd reckon they just as easily could have been the main chapter of the setting. Next is the Iron Hands. These guys are a little neglected, both in terms of models and lore. Their Primarch got killed 100% definitively really early in the Horus Heresy, which if you don't know is like 10,000 years before 40k even starts. And now they're edgy about it and very evil, even by Space Marine standards. They do have a tech and tank theme, however, and the black color scheme with the gear motif is not bad at all. But if you like that, I might have a different recommendation for you later on. In either case, the flesh is weak, and if you like bionic arms and tanks, these are your guys for Space Marines. Then come the Raven Guard, who also wear black armor and are even more emo than the Iron Hands. It's kind of their whole thing, alongside somehow being stealthy in a few thousand pounds of armor and using jetpacks. Their Primarch, Corvus Corax, is one of the more interesting ones, as he was sort of a freedom fighter type who went on to serve the Imperium of Man. They're not up to a huge amount in the lore recently, but the appeal is definitely there, and they may be edgy, but if that's your thing, that's okay. Then comes everybody's favorite, the Salamanders. They're pyromaniacs with a heart of gold and a really cool Primarch, Vulcan, who is almost definitely still alive or going to come back to life, even though he was atomized. Don't worry about it. They love fire and forging. Their color scheme is pretty good, and most of all, they're actually, as said, relatively decent people, by Space Marine standards. Insert obligatory unless it's an Eldar child joke here. They have pretty good lore both pre and post heresy, though it is a little limited in the modern setting. Their main quest right now is recovering artifacts from their Primarch. And I've heard, though this may not be super true, that they're actually going to be getting more models soon, so maybe their role in the lore will increase soon after I make this video. Next are the White Scars, Mongolian space bikers with one of the few other Primarchs who always had his head on straight, Jagatai Khan. He realized that the Emperor was a dickhead, but Horus was too, and only sided the way he did as a lesser of two evils kind of situation. Other than that, the White Scars like going fast and writing poetry, which I can get behind. Fair warnings with them, however, there aren't many biker marine models, so getting their vibe right in-game and model-wise is kind of hard to pull off, especially as the other thing is that their armor is white, which can be very difficult to paint well. And so we're finally done with Space Marines, and now the entire rest of the video I'll be selling you on things that aren't Space Marines, starting with the other Imperial factions. The first of those is my girlfriend's army of choice, the Adepta Sororitas, or the Sisters of Battle. Gun nuns, religious fanaticism, zealous warriors, an absolutely wonderful archetype, and some of the best designed models in the entire setting. There literally isn't a bad thing to say about the Sisters as far as vibes go. They've got power armor, yet keep a unique identity away from the Space Marines via their mechanics centering around their extreme faith in the Emperor, which invokes literal miracles on the battlefield. It is worth noting, however, that they are kind of expensive to collect, and I don't know if I'd recommend them to a first-time painter, as even their most basic models are fairly complex. So if you are determined to start on them, I'd recommend buying some random, like, cheap army men or something to practice painting on first, just so you can get comfortable with the process before accidentally messing up on the expensive real thing. Then again, that's probably good advice regardless of what army you start with. Following them are the Adeptus Custodes, who are basically the Mega Marines. They're the Emperor's personal guardians, and toe for toe have the strongest infantry in the game, especially in melee. They're all bespoke individual creations and wear a hell of a lot of gold. Their introduction into the mainstream lore is recent by 40k standards, so there isn't a huge amount about them quite yet, but their portrayals are pretty interesting. In any case, they are a great start because their color scheme is super easy to do. Just spray gold primer and you're halfway done already. And they're also super cheap to collect because you only really need a few to finish out an army. Adeptus Mechanicus is next, and they are hands down my favorite Imperial faction. Only the Dark Angels are even in the running with them in my mind. They're probably one of the other groups you've heard of at some point, other than the Space Marines or the phrase blood for the blood god. For the Adeptus Mechanicus, praise the Omnissiah and venerate the machine god. The flesh is weak, and so they replace it with the strength and certainty of steel. Almost every other faction in the game has a fantasy equivalent somewhere because fundamentally, 40k is a fantasy setting in space, but not the Mechanicus. They are really quite original, and their aesthetic is just perfect. Industrial body horror at its finest. These guys in the image behind me are humans. You know the soundtrack that's been playing this whole video? It's from a video game about these guys. All their models are just weird, from the lowliest Skitarias to their Da Vinci-esque Archaeopters. I love the Mechanicus. But I promise to be straightforward, so here are your warnings. They're very expensive, especially right now. Their models are hard to build and harder to paint. Be warned. But, in my opinion, if you really like them, it's worth it because there's just nothing quite like them. Next is the Astra Millitarum. Is your favorite movie Platoon? Starship Troopers? Maybe Saving Private Ryan? Do you have a basement filled with Civil War, Napoleonic War, or pike and shot wargaming miniatures? The Astra Millitarum may be for you. They are your normal people, your unaugmented, your unsouped up, your regular Joe Schmo soldiers. They face unfathomable horrors with woefully inadequate weapons and make up for it with sheer force of numbers, firepower, and more than anything, bravery. If you want that vibe that good fantasy does right of regular people standing up to extra-dimensional, unfathomably evil horrors, the Astra Millitarum is where you'll find that. They aren't perfect, but without them the Imperium would fall in a week. Collecting them may be expensive, you may need a lot of them, and they do have some old models, but if they're right for you, then you'll be able to look past all of that because the Emperor protects. Next are the Imperial Agents. They are the servants, in general, of the Imperial Inquisition, made up of specialized teams sent to track down and defeat the Imperium's enemies. But this faction has probably the biggest caveat of them all. Do not buy them to play the game. Just don't. They're basically not a real army. They are a model collection that you put parts of into other factions sometimes. They do, however, have cool models, and a great many of 40k's best novels are written from the perspective of characters who would be classified as Imperial agents, namely things like Eisenhorn. But yeah, I once again reiterate, do not buy them to play and win the game. Next are the Imperial Knights. They are giant stompy robots if you want Gothic Gundam in your wargame. I've got one, they're super fun to build and paint, and excellent collectibles. They aren't a loreful army, at least not really, but you know why you're here. However, I must say, as many others have warned before, for gameplay purposes, they skew things a lot. Games against Imperial Knights will almost never be super interesting because it's just a check for whether the enemy brought enough anti-tank. If they did, you lose. If they didn't, you win. That's basically it. So if you want to play Knights, I might recommend doing what I did. Just buy one, or, a few, and add it to different Imperial armies to run with them every now and again. It's never been super meta or effective in the game to do that if you're playing competitively, but it's always really fun. Next, we move on to Chaos, the servants of the dark gods Khorne, the god of war and blood, Tzeentch, the god of magic and trickery, Nurgle, the god of disease and death, and Slaanesh, the god of excess and jorking it. They decided the Emperor was cringe 10,000 years ago and have been trying to rip the Skeleton Man off his golden throne ever since. This is the category of heavy metal factions. If that's your music taste, then you're probably already playing Chaos. And we'll start first with Chaos Knights, because they're the same as Imperial Knights, but with more spikes and, a bespoke unit. They're the same, but they're evil, which is cool. Moving on, we have Chaos Demons. These are the supernatural servants of each of those 4 Chaos Gods. The demons of Khorne are powerful in melee, those of Nurgle are tough and debuff their enemies, those of Tzeentch have powerful magic, ranged attacks, and other assorted tomfoolery, and those of Slaanesh are quick and generally good at armor piercing. If you want to play pure eldritch evil, the demons are for you, with a big caveat as well, unfortunately. The future of this faction as its own thing is hugely in jeopardy right now, so if you really want demons, just pick one of the gods to focus on right now. In addition, if you're watching a while after this video goes out, look up what the state of Chaos Demons is as a faction. Other things to consider include that their models are a little old, but it's not to a horrible degree by any means. Following them are the Chaos Space Marines. These are the ones that, despite generally hating him in some form or fashion, followed Horus all the way to Holy Terra to try and blow it up. Let the galaxy burn, they say. Chaos Space Marines are a little like the Imperial ones in that they have a few factions with a lot of attention and several with not as much, but we'll start with the latter first this time. The biggest Chaos Space Marine Legion is the Black Legion, the descendants of those who directly followed Horus, and a collective of any number of different warbands, all with their own goals. However, they are united by following Abaddon the Despoiler, once a mere space marine who ascended to become the champion of chaos in the galaxy. They've got the classic gold and black scheme and represent the bad guys of the setting. If you want to be big bad number 1, these are your guys, and they do grant you access to a few unique models, mostly Abaddon, alongside the rest of the excellent Chaos Marine range. Next are the Wordbearers, my personal favorite Chaos faction. I'm even accidentally wearing their colors in a way. They are extreme zealots in service of the Dark Gods, and the reason that the rebellion against the Emperor even happened in the first place, for it was under their Primarch Lorgar's supervision that the Space Marines discovered Chaos. It's all detailed in the excellent book, The First Heretic, which I highly recommend. Nonetheless, in the current setting, they have a slick red and silver scheme and represent those who follow the Chaos Gods most faithfully, even if that means being some of the most evil, debaucherous dastards the setting has to offer. Following them is the Alpha Legion, a faction so wrapped in mystery even they don't know what side they're on. They had 2 Primarchs, 1 loyal, 1 traitor, 1 dead, 1 alive, and nobody knows 100% for sure which is which. They're represented by a Hydra because it really summarizes them pretty well. For every time you slay an Alpha Legionnaire, more appear with another scheme in mind. They're a lot of fun and have a great color scheme, but they're very confusing. Then there are the Iron Warriors. Remember the Imperial Fists? That's these guys' worst enemy. Where the Fists are defenders, the Iron Warriors are siege masters. They bind demons into their war machines and blow apart even the mightiest of fortresses. They're also polar opposites to the Wordbearers because the Iron Warriors don't care about chaos as a religion whatsoever. They use it as a tool to fuel their diabolical war machine. Then come the Night Lords, who are just as edgy as the Raven Guard, but with an arguably cooler color scheme. A great series of novels and 100% more flayings. They are evil in a whole different way. They just really, really love torture. They also get their asses handed to them all the time, but with that said, you'd probably think they'd suck and be super one-note, but they're actually quite interesting. Also, they have lightning bolts on their armor, need I say more. Anyway, with the unaligned Chaos Legions out of the way, we now move on to those who chose one of the 4 gods. The first of those would be the World Eaters. Blood for the Blood God, skulls for the Skull Throne. These guys care about nothing other than sheer, frothing at the mouth, mindless violence. They don't use magic because it's cringe and for weaklings. Instead, all they use is their chaos-infused muscle to beat every living thing they see to death. For all this wanton, almost ridiculous hatred, they actually have a very interesting story. If you want to see part of it, I'd recommend reading Betrayer. As far as models and such goes, they have a small range of new ones. They're a little tricky to play well because they lack in flexibility and their range is kind of small, but that should, hopefully, improve with time. They also have a Primarch, Angron, who is unfathomably angry because someone stuck nails in his head and he was never able to get them out. Now he's so enraged that he often just refuses to die, or in his case, go back into the warp. Next are the Thousand Sons, the Servants of Tzeentch. They messed with a little too much magic back in the day, and I would argue through Magnus, their one-eyed Primarch, did something quite wrong, and doomed the Imperium's failsafe plan against chaos. So they decided, screw it, we're embracing it, and now serve the God of Change. All of their non-sorceress troops were atomized, becoming a sort of ephemeral dust that operates their now construct suits of armor, at least for those that weren't spellcasters who were able to keep their flesh. They are the magic army, if you're looking for that. Their models, however, are the oldest of the mono-god chaos factions, and their range is a little limited like most of them. All the same, their aesthetic is very sick, very ancient Egyptian. Their Primarch is Magnus the Red, as said, one of, if not the best, spellcaster in the setting. And yes, I know I'm calling them spellcasters and they're psychers, but it's the same thing. Next were my chosen mono-god chaos faction, the Death Guard. These guys would fit in well were they a part of Trench Crusade. They fell to Nurgle, the god of plague, and so now are carriers of the absolute most horrific diseases one can imagine. Their flesh spurts out from their armor, they grow horns and extra eyes, and their stomachs turn into gaping, toothy maws. This is the body horror faction, and it's sick in every sense of that word. As an army, they are about that trench fighting, slow, grinding, attritional warfare, backed up by heavy artillery and, when necessary, beating people with trench clubs at close range. They easily have the biggest range of mono-god chaos factions, so you'll be spoilt for choice. They even have bespoke vehicles. They're not too expensive either, and if you make a mistake while painting, you can just say it's Nurgle's fault and they rotted weird. Also, their Primarch, Mortarion, is a giant Moth Grim Reaper and is an excellent painting project, even if he's not quite the most interesting character. Also, read the Lords of Silence. Finally, fresh off the press is the Emperor's Children, the Servants of Slaanesh. Everything they like doing involves things I can't talk about on YouTube. They're quick and rely on finesse and various status boons. Not a single one of these guys is anywhere near sane, and that's exactly how they like to be. They wield whips and even sonic weapons and very keen dueling type swords, giving them a very unique arsenal. While lore-wise their legion is small and it's a wonder they're still a functional organization, they provide some of the absolute worst fates to those they defeat in battle. Their Primarch, Fulgrim, is also a giant snake monster that you basically can't escape from, and as said, their models are brand spanking new. That does mean they don't have a whole lot of different types of models at the moment, but as with the others, that will improve over time, and what they started with is fairly solid. And after them, we move on to the everything that has nothing to do with humans category, the Xenos. And the first of those is yet another of my favorites, the Aeldari. There aren't many of us Eldar fans, other than like Pancreas No Work, but we do exist. The Aeldari are the last remnants of an ancient civilization that once essentially ruled the entire galaxy unchallenged for millions of years. However, sects of that ancient society got a little too saucy and caused the birth of Slaanesh. Common misconception: that's not the Aeldari's fault, because they were the ones who explicitly recognized that trying to bone everything that can move in every possible way might lead to bad outcomes. And so the Aeldari fled onto planet-sized starships called craft worlds and reforged their society anew as their debaucherous cousins basically exploded. They too have gotten a lot of fresh new models, and while they can be a little spindly, I'd say they're fairly beginner-friendly, painting-wise. As far as gameplay is concerned, most of them will be quite fragile but quick and deadly. They're a bit tough to play, but also not the most expensive faction. They are directly followed by their cousins, the Drukhari, who are the descendants of the Eldar who were responsible for the whole Slaanesh thing. They are, like many other groups in the setting, comically evil, but in the sense they will use their mastery of genetic manipulation to turn you into a piece of furniture that's still conscious and, most of all, capable of feeling pain. More than evil, they are sadistic. Lore-wise, they aren't huge players, as they don't need all that much more than new bodies to fuel their debauchery, which keeps Slaanesh away. They go on occasional raids, planetary populations disappear every now and again, and that sort of thing. Their models are a little older than their Azuryani cousins, but some of them, especially the Kabbalite branch, are pretty sick. Could be worth waiting for what should be a sorta imminent refresh on some of the rest of the range, though. Gameplay-wise, they're even faster and deadlier than the Aeldari, but even easier to kill. Next are the Tyranids. Alongside Chaos, one could argue they are one of the more apocalyptic threats to the galaxy. In my opinion, there are three main forces capable of wiping out the Imperium eventually, one of those being Chaos, another one being one that I'll get to soon, and the last for sure being the Tyranids. It's a massive hive mind of xenomorphs that make the bugs of Starship Troopers look like a scouting party. They come in apocalyptically large numbers, drown worlds in monster teeth and bug bodies, then eat everything, down to the dirt, leaving nothing even sort of organic behind. Some say they aren't evil, they're just hungry guys, but from what I've seen, the hive mind, while still basically just an alien, incomprehensible consciousness, does have something we can map onto, and that is pure malice. There's even the rumor that all the Tyranids thus seen in the setting, which is already a lot, are only a scouting party themselves for a greater whole of the hive mind. I'm not sure I believe it, because it doesn't quite strike me as the way they'd end the setting, because don't get me wrong, that would be a setting-ending truth, but it's said enough that I've got to mention it. They too have gotten a fair amount of new, gorgeously disgusting models, and while they are expensive to collect, the Tyranid fans I know love them. And of course, they're varied. You can play with a giant horde or go for a focus on giant monsters and do the monster mash, as a friend of mine has. After them come their good old pals and my favorite flavor of Tyranid, the Genestealer Cults. Mad Max meets alien infestation? Yes, please. They basically fight using Viet Cong tactics and acts of domestic terrorism to defeat forces far superior to them in skill and technology, even if that means sacrificing wave after wave of neophyte troops. They're like the Guard, but even worse equipped and even more willing to throw lives away with no regrets as they serve the four-armed Emperor, that is to say the hive mind, which tends to eat them if it ever finds them, and they need to find them because Genestealer Cults are like an infection spread all over the galaxy. Their models aren't incredibly new, but are by no means old, and they have some surprisingly good lore. Painting them is hard, however, as they are numerous and complex, just ask me why mine are still barely painted, and playing them is a great selling point as they're very unique, but they are challenging to play well too. After them comes the other faction that could blow up the galaxy, the Necrons. These guys were in contention to be in charge of the galaxy alongside the Eldar, but the Eldar won out eventually. The Necrons decided, screw it, we're taking a nap for a while and we'll see how things are in 60 million years. Did I mention they were once normal fleshy beings, but after being deceived by star gods, they had their souls eaten and got turned into Terminators? There's also that point. Anyway, they've started waking up, and though their technology is nigh unmatched in the setting, they aren't morning people, so they've ended up infighting, experiencing certain kinds of failures, and otherwise having some trouble getting it up. But where they have it, by the Emperor, they are a planet-shattering force. They've also got some new models, which are all pretty good, and gameplay-wise, they're pretty hard to kill. Next comes another fan favorite, the Orks, yet another of the things you might have heard of before. They're a bunch of big green guys just looking to have a grand old time. And by grand old time, I mean shoot and hack apart any non-green living thing they see. And if there aren't any non-green living things to shoot and hack apart, then green things will do too, as they probably infight more than any other faction. On the occasion they band together, their sheer numbers and good enough weapons and tech make them incredibly dangerous. While the degree that their magic of believe a thing and it'll turn out to be true is definitely exaggerated by meme lore, it is by no means an entire fabrication. They've also got a new batch of models recently, though there are still plenty of old ones in their ranks, and their gameplay is surprisingly varied, being able to make melee and shooting-based armies work, and they even have magic, though they aren't exactly good at shooting, they're just good at doing a lot of shooting. Then come the Tau, otherwise known as the Gundam faction or the Shooting faction. A faction of upstart blue aliens, the Tau serve the philosophy of the greater good, which, while it might involve a little bit of mind control here and there, is probably better than a lot of what the Imperium is up to. While the Tau wouldn't know what end of a sword to hold, they have incredible guns, and their big robots are extremely sick. Their vibe is very different from a lot of other things in the setting, but it definitely sets them apart from the other factions. Apparently, lore-wise, they've gotten some good books recently, and while they do have a pretty old range, most of it holds up pretty well. Gameplay-wise, however, it's worth mentioning they're a little one-note. There's basically no melee nor any psychic abilities, so don't choose them unless you're happy with an overwhelming focus on shooting. And finally, we have the most recent faction added to the game as far as Xenos go, the Leagues of Votann. I mean, what more is there to start with than rock and stone? They're cloned space dwarves that serve an ancient AI complex that provides them wisdom. Though they did descend from humanity, they are far divorced from that past now and are their own force in the galaxy that seeks profit through mining and plunder. While they share some aesthetic qualities with the Imperium, the sort of runic dwarfy vibe definitely keeps them firmly in the category of being their own thing. While not super evil, they do sometimes mine inhabited planets until the planet becomes less than habitable. So they aren't heroes per se, and their Votann, the AI leaders of their society, are decaying over time. As far as lore goes, there's not a whole lot as they're extremely new, and the model range is quite limited if very well done. There's enough there to be worth jumping into, but waiting another edition is maybe not the worst idea in the world to see where they're at. And the last for real is a brief rest in peace to the Harlequins, Eldar space clowns who worship the laughing god. Refer to Aeldari if that sounds interesting. You can still buy their models, but they used to be their own faction. Alas. But with that, I think we've basically covered the factions of 40k. Faction videos are fun, and I might do more at some point, but we'll see. Anyway, I've shared my favorite factions in the video, so tell me about yours, or if you'd like advice on just getting into this setting in general, feel free to ask for advice in the comments. I read them all. And in addition, every like and subscription goes a long way since we're still small here at JBat. We also have a Discord if you want to hang out with my editor and I, and a Patreon if you're crazy enough to want it, where we post all of our videos a week early. And on that note, I need to thank some of those patrons of ours. Those being Knights of the Inner Circle, Shadowrunner, and Sani, our Knight Nico, and Greer, our loyal squire. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed, and remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war.